Okay, we will make a start. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Skills Committee for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. I'm just wondering whether I ought to wait for Joe to come back. Is Joe taking minutes? Or anyway, thank you all for being here. It's great to have new members of the committee with us and old members of the committee returning. Welcome to Katie, who I think is new. I'm not sure whether we've got anyone else who's brand new today. Yes, I was wondering, is it two Katies? Hooray. Excellent. Welcome to both Katies. That's brilliant. Really, really good. James, Eileen and I are going to start feeling like, and Charlotte. Anyway, welcome to new members of the committee and to members who've been here before. And we are starting slightly late. We had an induction session before this meeting, which was very helpful, and then we've had one or two very slight issues getting online. We have received no questions from public speakers, and we also don't have questions from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for this committee. Meeting with us because she is going off to join South Yorkshire, which is a promotion, and we're really delighted that you are that your work here has been recognised and you're moving on to other things, but we will miss you a great deal. So thank you very, very much for everything you've done for the combined for what has been an interesting period, and certainly one where the importance of the skills work has gone up the agenda a great deal. So thank you very much for your time with us. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to say before we move on to the next item on the agenda. Oh yes, I need to say something about the fact that we have to be careful about political comments in this meeting, because in case anyone hasn't noticed, there's a general election going on. So if we could try and make sure that our discussions remain focused on the issues in hand and are not influenced by outside political affiliations and biases, and I'm sure we will do that because we normally are very good at being collaborative on this committee. Right, the next item on the agenda I think is the election of Vice Chair. I have established that Sam is willing to continue as our Vice Chair and I would like to nominate him. Thank you, Eileen. Are there any other nominations for Vice Chair? Okay, I think I think if that's the case, is there anybody who would not be supportive of Sam continuing as our Vice Chair? I don't see anyone objecting, so if we could take that as carried, that would be excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you to Sam. The next item on the agenda is, I don't think we've got any apologies for absence, have we? Other than
apologies from the Mayor.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We note his apologies. And then does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any items to be considered today? I don't see any hands, but if anybody does realise that they have any such interest later on in the meeting, you can declare it at any point. We will now move on to the minutes and the action log. Let's take the minutes first. Is the committee happy to approve the minutes from the 4th of March as an accurate record? I'm seeing nods all round, so I will take it that those are approved, and we'll move on to the action log. Are there any comments to be made on the action log? Does anybody want to say anything about the action log? I think everything is all right on it. Okay, I don't see any comments on that, so we will also take the action log as approved. Thank you. We don't have any public questions. Now, item 5 is the Combined Authority Forward Plan. Are there any questions or comments, or can we take this as noted? I think we will note it. I think at some point we will probably the plan will be reviewed in the light of elections and other issues, but for now we will note it, and that's great. Item number 6 is the wider outcomes framework, and this is the one where we are hoping that Helen Plant is joining us to introduce this item. However, the screen doesn't look terribly promising. Okay.
Is it worth me just briefly
Yes, that would be
explaining what
great.
this is? Because everyone should have had, I think, the report, the Phase 1 report that Helen has done. And forgive me, I'm stepping in for Jackie Bradley here, who is not very well at the moment. So my intricate knowledge of this report is not as it would be if Jackie were here. But in terms of you know, what this is all about. You'll recall, I hope in March, Jackie set out various ways that we were looking to improve efficiency and effectiveness across the adult education budget, and then to test and learn some things and to roll them out more widely across the skills team more generally. So this is very much part of that work. And in a nutshell, it's getting us beyond, valuable though this is, it's getting us beyond just thinking how we quantify things in terms of numbers of learners and qualifications. Because, you know, as we were talking about, and we have talked about a lot over the months, the value of reaching people with skills and employability and all of those kinds of support are not necessarily measured by the qualification at the end of it. And so this piece of work is looking at real cutting-edge research. It's looking at what's the real best practices across the sector, not least in some of the other bigger combined authorities, to say, how do we improve the way that we evaluate and measure impact across skills, particularly when are in areas where we're dealing more on the employability and the more kind of generic support and confidence that people need to be in the workplace. So very much on the agenda of the economically inactive and how we assess whether we have been effective in reaching those people and having an impact in what we're doing. It's also very much, you know, relevant to the agenda of where health and where the role of, you know, the DWP in supporting people back into work and the role of skills, how all of that, the intersectionality of all those things, and how they need to come together to effectively support people who are not at the moment in the workplace or who need help. How do we get better at managing and articulating the impact that we're having? So this is very much, the Phase 1 report that you've got is very much looking at the methodology and the approach that we want to take to that. And just to say, in the context of devolution and further devolution for the combined authority, our ability to articulate value and for it to be meaningful value and meaningful impact is more and more important to us the further we develop on the devolution journey. So that's the kind of context to that, and what Helen was going to do was to set out the kind of the headlines of her research and the methodology, and also talk a little bit about next steps. So Helen, I don't know whether you're hearing us at the moment.
I just heard from Helen. Yes, I didn't hear anything.
I've just introduced you, Helen. So if you could pick up off the back of that, that would be great.
So you've just introduced me. Sorry, did you say?
I have, yes.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, and morning, everyone. I'm sorry not to be there with you. I'd intended to come and join your meeting, but unfortunately, the railways were against us this morning. So, as Claire may have said in her introduction, myself and my colleague, Mark Ravenhall, who I'm working with on this, have a background of, I think, probably over 20 years each in adult education policy and practice. And what I wanted to just run through this morning with you is a sort of quick summary of what hopefully you've seen already in the report, just a reminder of how we did that report and pulled it together, and then say a little bit about what we're doing now to take the work forward into Phase 2, and get any thoughts and feedback from you on that, what we're doing and how we're doing it. I've got a presentation. Shall I pull that up now, just to sort of give us a bit of a prop for the conversation? Okay. So it needs to be set up so I can share, which it doesn't look as if it is.
Helen, I think it's going to be not the easiest for everybody to see the presentation.
Oh, I can't hear what you're saying there.
I'm not sure how easy it will be for everybody to be able to see the presentation. I mean, we'll be able to see it a bit, but probably what you say speaking to it will probably be just as valuable.
Okay, that's fine then. In that case, I'll do that. So what I was going to cover then in the presentation was just a little bit of a reminder about how we pulled together the report in phase one. Some key points I think coming out of that for this committee, and with regard to how we're developing the framework, and then an overview of what we're currently doing in phase two and next steps. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least glance at the report from phase one. So this was put together in 2 stages, as you might remember from reading it. So the first thing we did was a review of the published and unpublished literature, national and international, from the last 20 years or so on developing frameworks on measuring outcomes from adult education, and on sort of using and refining those approaches. This is an area where quite a bit of work has been done, both nationally and internationally, and we wanted to make sure that whatever we do now is informed by that. Oh, okay. Great. So, yeah, could you go on to the next slide, please? Lovely, thank you. So also working with colleagues in the combined authority, we were able to have sight of some strategy documents, steered towards those. All of that was, of course, by and large in the public domain. So really get a sense of what the combined authority's intentions and understanding is around adult skills and learning. And then finally, the combined authority officers shared with us some data on AEB delivery to date, so we could get a sense of really what it is that the combined authority wants to achieve with the adult education budget at its disposal. From that, we identified 3 sort of main themes around which we structured the report, as you'll know. So we looked at purposes and priorities. We looked at current approaches to collecting data within the combined authority area. As you'll be aware from the report, your providers are already doing a lot in this area to collect evidence, and clearly we want to build on what's already happening. Certainly don't want to be introducing new things that might make things more onerous, and we really want to sort of understand the current activity. And then we looked a bit at sort of systems that are being developed for measuring outcomes and impact. And then following on from that, having kind of, as I say, identified the 3 themes that we were going to structure the work around, we did a series of interviews with stakeholders, both within the combined authority and in other combined authorities, and then nationally as well, to really understand what the current state of play is with thinking around measuring the outcomes, including wider outcomes of adult education, and to get a sense of what other combined authorities are doing in this space, because clearly, as a sort of indicated throughout the report, this is something where there is a substantial amount of work that's already taken place over the last couple of decades, but it has certainly been given a new impetus as a result of devolution, as Claire may have said in her introduction, because as a devolved budget, it's clearly critical that we're able to understand what it is that can be achieved through using sort of place-based approaches with this funding. So having done that work quite quickly, it was about 6 months worth of work to pull all this together. We conducted the analysis and produced the report that you've seen. Could I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So I think sort of for the committee today, there are a number of things that we just wanted to flag up coming out of the report. I'm not sure how much of a sense of this first point you got from reading it, but I think it's worth saying that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough really are sort of at the cutting edge of the development work that's taking place with regard to measuring the outcomes of adult learning funded through the AEB. There is, as you'll have seen, some work being taken forward within the DFE at a national level, but really, whilst this is something that other combined authorities recognise they need to really get a handle on, I'd say there's only one other devolved authority which is sort of at anything like a sort of similar level of actually getting the work underway. There is a kind of group of skills leads from the devolved authorities which meet and discuss this kind of thing, and I think we have a sense from that people are looking at what's happening in Cambridge and Peterborough to see how you're doing it. The outcomes framework that we're looking to develop is informed by and underpinned by evidence from international research, showing that adult learning delivers overlapping benefits across three policy domains of health and well-being, work and community. There's, I think, consensus now that it makes sense to talk about the outcomes of adult learning in relation to those three broad policy areas. And I think our sense from looking at your policy and funding documents and so on is that you know this, and you're currently certainly commissioning to try and achieve that. There's a recognition, I think, that these are the kinds of areas in which the AB can make a difference. Work's important, but the other policy areas can also be impacted by this funding. And critically, of course, what the adult education budget allows you to do is to develop approaches and learning opportunities that have the potential to reach people who are furthest from learning and the labour market and bring them back into reskilling and upskilling, not just by focusing on learning for work, but by developing their ability to, for example, manage their health better, to get involved in their community and so on. And all this sort of adds to the sum of the ways in which I think you kind of almost get like a multiplier effect from investment in adult education because it touches on these three policy domains. Whilst we are looking at national and international examples, building on that, of course, it's really important that what we're doing is tailored to your context. It certainly isn't about trying to design something or taking something off the peg. Well, there isn't actually anything on the peg, as I think I've sort of indicated with bullet point 1. So it will be, this is really about designing something that makes sense in Cambridge and Peterborough, makes sense in that it speaks to your policy intentions and because it resonates and makes sense for providers and for learners and for other stakeholders such as employers. When the framework's implemented, it will provide evidence to demonstrate the value of the adult education budget and the benefits that it brings for the area. But also, what you gain from that, the intelligence that you gain from this exercise, will then be able to inform future commissioning. So I think we're looking at, we need to think about this as something which sort of fits into the commissioning rounds, commissioning cycle. So there's a sort of learn and apply kind of thing going on. And it's also worth saying that, part of the value of this for your providers is that they will get a lot of intelligence from it as well, which will help them to with their planning and design and delivery. Okay, so on the next slide, please. So this is really just to, again, kind of reinforce that message there, that we're really thinking about adult education with regard to these three overlapping domains, building on, you know, internationally credible, widely recognised evidence. There's a strong consensus around this. So it's a UNESCO piece of work from 2016 which underpins it, is well recognised and well regarded, pulls together a whole range of evidence to sit behind this. And we really sort of see what we're looking to develop within the combined authority as being built upon this. And I think this diagram is quite nice, and I thought it was worth sharing with you because it really sort of reinforces that sense of the multiplier effect. You know, you sort of get that double, triple dollar from your investment in adult education because it touches on so many other policy areas. And as I said, I think, you know, we have a very strong sense that you recognise this. And what we're looking at is developing a framework which pulls it all together and gives you some good evidence about the outcomes and impact of the work that you're commissioning. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so what are we doing now in phase 2? So we are looking to develop the outcomes that matter to stakeholders. As I said, we're really not looking at having some kind of generic framework here. So we need to understand what are the outcomes that are important for the combined authority. One of the pieces of work that sits behind this that we've done is to look across the range of national and international research on the outcomes of adult education, and to pull out all the outcomes that we could find and the different ways in which they were articulated. And that gave us over 100 individual statements about the outcomes of adult learning, which we could then sort of marshal under those three headings of health, work and community. And we're sort of going to be testing those out with stakeholders to see which ones kind of resonate here and therefore which ones might be suitable to sort of go into further evidence collection or an analysis and so on. Then we'll look at the evidence requirements. So if once we understand what sort of policy intent is, what the outcomes are that matter, then we need to think about where do we get the evidence? What are we going to be measuring over future years to see to what extent these outcomes are being achieved? And so we're working with data colleagues within the combined authority to look at some of the detail of what's currently being measured and to see where there are any gaps in evidence sources, and obviously providers are helping us with this as well. You'll see from the report that there's a lot of work already happening at a provider level, collecting good evidence about, you know, what learners get out of their learning, not just in terms of qualifications that they achieve or learning outcomes in terms of, you know, the new things that they can do that they couldn't do before, but also starting to understand a bit more about, you know, how it's impacted on their health, how it's impacted on their community involvement, whether it's made a difference to their working life, and if so, how. So we're looking at trying to get a sense of everything that's already happening out there and see where there are any gaps. And then critically, of course, to understand in implementing the framework what the role of providers is and the ways in which the combined authority can add value to the measurement process. As I said, and clearly no one has an interest in sort of putting more burdensome evidence collection requirements on providers, but there are ways in which the combined authority, sitting above all of this, could potentially do things that will actually really help providers with understanding the outcomes of their learning activities. Final slide, please. Okay, so how are we doing it? Well, we're sort of in the throes of this at the moment, really. So we're in the process of carrying out stakeholder engagement and consultation. And in fact, this week we're holding the first two learner consultation events. That's tomorrow. So we've got one in Peterborough in the morning and one in Huntingdon in the afternoon. One will be testing out sort of outcome statements and so on with learners in a way that's meaningful for them. Mark and I have not experience of running learner consultation events, so I think we're looking forward to that, and you know should get a real sense of what for residents of the combined authority is important in terms of the difference that learning makes. And we're working with the project's internal working group, that's the group of providers, to really sort of drill down into what they're currently doing and where the gaps might be and how we could enhance that through the frameworks of what else might be needed in terms of evidence collection. And then the intention is to pilot the framework in community learning in the next academic year, and then roll it, sort of do a bit of kind of test and review, and then roll out in wider AEB funded provision from 2025. The reason for doing that is because we sort of wanted to test it with one part of the AEB, and it makes a lot of sense to test it with community learning. Much of the development work that has gone on nationally to date to develop measurement frameworks has focused on community learning for the quite obvious reason, I think we mentioned in the report, that because this isn't in general qualification bearing, it's always been rather vulnerable to I suppose that sense to a view from outside that, well, how do we know it's actually making a difference? How do we know it's actually achieving anything for learners without the kind of reassurance of the proxy of a qualification to tell us so? So there's quite a bit of experience within the community learning sector around understanding this and how to do it. You know, your providers are represented on the national stakeholder group that DFE has convened to look at developing some national approaches which will be applied in non-devolved areas. So it makes sense to start with community learning and then take it forward from there. I think that's as much as I wanted to say. I'd be interested to hear any thoughts, take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. That was a very thorough report on the paper, and there's lots and lots of interesting stuff there. Questions from people? Sam Carling.
Is that working? Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you ever so much for that. I found this paper really, really interesting. I think there are a few just comments I wanted to pick up on, and then a couple of questions as well. So I think it was page 28, there was a brief mention there of the digital badge initiatives that the Region of Learning is using. And I'd really welcome a conversation about how we can get more employers to sort of recognise those as part of sort of looking at the wider outcomes of community learning, because that's really having an impact as far as we can see anecdotally as well as evidence-based. I was interested in why the Greater London Authority selected volunteering as one of the metrics they measured. So it's quite a niche question, fair enough, if you'd rather sort of get back to that later. But I think I agree that it's better to take a broader view than that and perhaps look at social integration with volunteering being a sub-measurement within that. But it'd just be interesting to hear what their rationale was, if anything. And then on stakeholder engagement, just to stress the learner engagement point, I would like us to engage directly if possible, not just necessarily rely on providers to do that, as helpful as that is. I think there's some good points raised about some being perhaps a little bit protective and us wanting to get a broader sense of how people are feeling about that. And yeah, in terms of sort of the sub-criteria that we will end up using within the three broad themes at the end, I'm not sure if there's another skills committee meeting before this would then come into being used. So it might just be useful to sort of have a look at those by circulation if there's not, because that would be really interesting. But thanks ever so much. Really, really interesting paper.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall I Shall I pick up where I think that's appropriate? I mean, I think on the digital badges, that felt like that was not necessarily something for us to take forward here. Would that be right, or was that a more sort of general point, or
That's probably true. Yeah, I just meant sort of as the combined authority in general. I thought it worth picking that up briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question on why volunteering is an interesting one. It's and why the GLA might have picked it up in relation to community. I think volunteering sometimes kind of sits in a couple of places potentially in this work. I mean, yes, with regard to community, but also, and actually often more with a bit more traction in relation to employment and sort of volunteering as a step towards skill development, getting out and engage and sort of being engaged in an activity outside of the usuals, maybe outside of the home or something like that, and as a step towards employment. So I think whilst I understand what you're saying, that it can feel quite niche. I think in this kind of work, it's quite well recognised and quite widely understood to be something which can be particularly relevant in regard to employment. Quite why GLA decided it was going to sit in community, I'm not sure. Clearly, it also makes sense there, and I guess there's a bit of a debate to be had there around the purposes of volunteering, the motivations for volunteering, and is it about skills or is it about that community involvement, or is it both? So that's probably it's not an answer that kind of gets to your question about why GLA chose it when it seems quite niche, but I'd say perhaps for this type of work it doesn't feel that niche. It's generally something that's picked up in frameworks that have been developed previously, because particularly for people, as I said, that we might be talking about who are really at some distance from the labour market and kind of engagement in sort of wider activities, volunteering can be a really important stepping stone. So stakeholder engagement, learner engagement. Were you suggesting there that it might be worth trying to engage with residents who are not actually in learning? Was that the point there? Did I understand that correctly?
I think the point I was just raising was in terms of when we're trying to put together outcomes frameworks and sort of look at specific points that we can measure, it would be good for us to engage directly with some people that have gone through some of the community learning initiatives.
Oh yeah, that's what we're doing tomorrow. So the groups tomorrow are groups of learners who are currently involved in community learning, some of whom may have been on a number of courses previously, and we're going to be that's exactly the groups that we're going to be testing out the individual outcome statements with, to see which ones are most, sort of resonate most for them and are most meaningful for them. The provider role has been really in sort of getting some groups together for us, telling learners about the fact we're doing this and getting some volunteers.
Thank you very much, Helen. Very thorough. Are there other questions on this report? Sam,
Thank you. No, I think that's really helpful, and really just to note, I mean, the specific recommendations, which I don't think we're required to sort of formally adopt today, but sound extremely compelling, almost staggeringly difficult to disagree with. But the fact that we've had to sort of pull this work together to evidence on which to base them, I think does underline that point you made about the extent to which this is really new work everywhere, and hopefully this will be sort of normalised in terms of how we think about why we're funding the things that we're funding going forward. But I mean, I liked in particular the emphasis in recommendation 2 around individual learner focus grouping as well, that other Sam has first Sam has picked up already. So yeah, I'm very happy with us progressing on with this. I think our real interest is understanding understanding the data that we get out of it now.
Thank you. I think that was just endorsement rather than a question. So that's great. And I don't see any other hands up. Claire, do you want to say something?
Sorry. Yeah, just to say thank you to Helen for this work, and also to just note that this has absolutely been driven by Jackie Bradley, who's not here at the moment because she's not very well. So I'd just like to record my real thanks to her for driving this forward.
Thank you, Claire. That's important. And yes, I certainly echo thanks to Helen for a very thorough presentation under slightly difficult circumstances, which we very much appreciate, and to Jackie for all the work that's gone into it. And we will look forward to hearing more about the next steps on this work. I'm just thinking that I should know when that is, because I'm sure it's on the forward plan. It's also quite possible it's not. The next meeting is 29th of July, but I imagine we won't have an update on this by that point. So, but I imagine that we will have sort of 6 months or a bit, maybe slightly longer than that. Anyway, it will be good to hear how it goes. Thank you very much, Helen, for the report, which is duly noted.
Thank you very much, and thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
September, excellent, very good. That sounds more realistic than July for something new to have happened. That's great, thank you. Okay, we will move on to item 7, which is the adult education and FCFJ. I'm not actually sure, I can't remember what those acronyms stand for. Commissioning and funding flexibilities, which free courses for jobs. There we are. I should definitely know that. Thank you. Good, and I think this is being introduced by Claire.
It is, and again, just to say that this is very much Jackie's work and Jackie's paper, so forgive me if my fine detail of this is not as it would be if Jackie was here, but this absolutely goes to the core of the commissioning round that we're involved in at the moment for the adult education budget for 24-25, and it sets out for the committee to note our approach to that commissioning, and it also recommends that the committee suggests the combined authority that we adopt some new funding flexibilities for that year. So I'll just give an overview of those two things, and also, if I may, Chair, ask Nick, who's more of an expert on funding flexibilities than I am, to just give a bit more detail to that. And I'm not dropping him in that. I have asked him beforehand to do that. If we come first of all to the commissioning approach, I mean, given what we've already said today and also from presentations over the months at this committee, I don't think it'll be a surprise to know that we're taking forward the work we set out in January on growing sector skills pipelines. It is really very much in an early phase. So phase 1 of this, where we're inviting providers to think particularly around our priority sectors of life sciences, advanced manufacturing, digital, agri-tech, green, all the things that we know about that we've set as our priorities. And also in what we're describing as our enabling sectors around construction, health and social care, critically, engineering, transport, logistics. So encouraging our provider base as much as we can in this phase 1 to think about how they support those particular sectors, very much around kind of in-work upskilling, cross-skilling, reskilling, all those kinds of things. The second part of this, in terms of how we're trying to shape the strategic agenda through our commissioning, is very much looking at how we can reduce the gap or support reducing the gap between those who have skills and those who don't. And that goes very much to the work that we were talking around community learning, the work we want to do with people who are economically inactive to support them to go on a journey back into work. And also, you know, from that perspective, in terms of looking to work with people who are economically inactive, very much thinking about how we can support increasing the size of the workforce in the region, given how tight the labour market is at the moment. Just to flag two things on that, which I think, three things actually, which I think are important to note. We're introducing an Into Employment programme, which will look at wraparound support around employability, careers guidance, so very much thinking of that journey from not being in work and getting people into work. We are developing our work around ESOL to look at what Jackie's termed vocational ESOL, which is very much looking at contextualised language support. So, you know, if you are a professional coming into this country for you know, and wanting to work, what might that look like if you're a doctor? What might it look like if you're in a particular profession, to support your language development in that context? And we think that's an important development going forward. And the other thing just to note on that is the job outcome payments for providers is really trying to support our providers and send the signal, which of course we all know, that actually in the end the outcomes for all of this matter most of all. So we'll be supporting them in that. So just in terms of that reducing the gap between those with skills and those without, it also plays very much into the work that Helen was just talking about, of, you know, how we support people at that kind of intersection of health, well-being, community and skills, so we can, you know, enable people to reach more of their potential. So that's a bit of an overview of the commissioning approach. The other thing is to recommend that Skills Committee support our plans for flexibilities around funding. And a little bit just about the background to this. We are permitted under the devolution rules to have flexibilities around how the funding rules for the adult education budget in line with our regional priorities. And we can deviate, therefore, from the national rules. July 23, the adult education budget, in terms of nationally, became the Adult Skills Fund with funding rules that apply to that. And in the main, we will adopt those, but there are a few exceptions that we want to, where we want to apply our own new funding flexibilities on that, and we'll maintain our existing flexibilities from last year. So, Nick, in terms of just briefly to summarise what the new flexibilities are that we want to deploy.
Yeah, hello everyone. So there's no new flexibilities as such, but some amendments to flexibilities that came before in 2023-24. I think you've all got the documents. I'll just focus on the ones that have changed and will probably be more pertinent and relevant for any questions that may come up. Firstly, the subject of disadvantage uplift. So we as a command authority feel that areas where there is more disadvantage, where there is more need for skills to be delivered and targeted, we have said that we'll increase the funding that training providers get to receive to deliver training in those areas to those residents. That was in place last year. This year we've adapted that model, I suppose, to a tiered approach, as it says in the document, where it says actually any resident, depending on what percentile they're in of disadvantage, shall receive the same level of additional support. The providers will receive the same level of additional support, whereas in the past there had been maybe a more scientific approach that had been adopted that didn't necessarily reflect across all the districts. Equally is the wrong word, but in the same way. So we've just tried to make sure, we've tried to simplify it with a tiered system, but to make sure that there is more support as well in terms of funding available to the providers delivering training to those areas and to those residents. That's a disadvantage uplift. The second one is continuing to fully fund English and Maths qualifications. The third is the second level 3 qualification, and this is an adaptation, I suppose, in that the funding rules have said there's no longer a requirement to pay attention to people's prior attainment. So previously, if you already held a level 3 or a higher level qualification, you wouldn't necessarily be able to go and undertake a new level 3 or higher qualification in a different sector. That was prohibitive to people who wanted to change qualifications, change careers, change sectors that they're working in. So that rule has changed, and now if you hold a prior level 3 qualification, you can potentially undertake a new one to change your sector that you want to work in. The other notable one is increasing the low wage threshold. So last year it sat at £22,500. That was an eligibility criteria. If you earned more than that, you wouldn't necessarily get access to free training or free qualifications. We've increased that through conversations with employers, through conversations with our training providers to say, actually, there's people coming to us again, more often than not, that want to change sector, change career, that couldn't then go and engage with the careers and skills that they needed to support that. So by increasing that low wage threshold, we're able to bring more people into the eligibility for the qualifications. So they're the primary changes and adaptations to the funding flexibilities.
So one question of clarification on the level 3 qualification. That's a new change that's come in the national rules. Is that correct? And were we doing that anyway? So have they followed us? Have I understood that correctly, or is that not quite right?
Whether they followed us, I'm not too sure. You could always do a second level 3 qualification. We allowed a second level 3 qualification, but yeah, I think it's the national rules that have changed to say actually the prior attainment is no longer.
So effectively something that we were doing because we had local. I think that is probably correct. That one of the things that we used our devolution flexibility to do has now been recognised nationally as a good thing to do. And so we're allowed to do it without using our regional flexibility.
Yeah, that would be a question for Jackie. I wouldn't want to put on record the wrong answer to that question.
That's fair
Sorry.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Katie, do you want to ask your question? I don't think there's a problem with asking it. I'm just not sure you'll get a reply.
So I just have to check with the chair because I don't want to be too political. But obviously, depending on what happens in the next few weeks, whichever government is in power, there's different focuses. So post-19, post-18 expectations in terms of whether they're all going to be marching off to wherever they're going to be marching off to, or whether it's going to be job focus. Is there flexibility within the budgets to adapt what the expectations might be coming from central government? Or is this now set in stone and then it will be re-looked at in a year's time, 2 years' time kind of thing?
Yeah, I think my answer to that would be Sorry, I think looking at the chair for any nudge if I've got this wrong, but I think my view would be this, that the decision we make at this committee is for the funding rules for 24-25, and next year they'll come back to this committee for any future funding rules for 25-26.
I also think, I mean, I'm aware that there are various decisions that we have to make now in the context of what the framework is now, because our providers have to get on with planning their programmes. And I think there are a couple of quite urgent decisions that are coming up to enable providers to get on with planning programmes from September. There will obviously be changes kind of in the subsequent year, and I think we've had to manage with a relatively frequently changing programme over the last 3 or 4 years anyway. So that there's unfortunately that kind of seems to be the way things are. But for our providers, the more consistency that we can give them, the more likely they are to be able to get more learners through. So sticking with this, at least for now, enables them to plan. And with a bit of luck, there will be a bit more stability for the next bit of time. Let's see. Okay. Any other questions? Eileen?
I noticed the focus on people with illness and disability, and I was just wondering whether there's any evidence about people who are still struggling post-COVID to get back into work, and whether that could have an impact on outcomes for people.
I mean, I think there's been a whole host of research in terms of, you know, impact of COVID. But as an example, in terms of regionally, talking to colleagues at the DWP about issues around mental health, in particular wards in Cambridge, and what we know about young people in terms of the workforce as well. So I think there is a wealth of research on this, and particularly I think, you know, what is a focus that is very important is that the confidence and the employability to get young people in particular into the workforce who aren't currently at the moment.
Charlotte?
Just in regards to the disadvantage uplift, appreciating that transport doesn't fall within this remit here, but how will officers work across various other committees and structures across the wider region to make sure that transport, as we know in places like Fenland, is often the thing that holds back bringing learners into the right space?
I mean, my comment to that, I think, is that that's work that we need to now develop. I think my colleague Judith in Place and Connectivity, we know that the connections between skills and the work that she's doing is critical to this. This, I think, is part of the conversations that we have to have as combined authority as we go forward.
Just add a couple of tiny pieces to that, and somebody can tell me if they think I'm wrong. One of them is that with my county council hat on, and the county council is one of the providers for some of the community work, I think that they are definitely delivering more of the programme nearer to where learners are, so that learners don't have to travel as part of their set of criteria and changes in the way that they're working. So they're looking at giving more provision in whatever space you can find in a village near where people are, rather than always expecting people to travel. For some of these learners, the improved bus routes and improved bus fares will also help, but it obviously won't help everybody. For the disability thing, that's not necessarily that helpful. So it is something that there is a lot of awareness about. Nick is going to say something too.
I think it's fair to say as well, the way the disadvantage uplift works, we're training providers are able to access more funding per head for delivery in those areas. Our hope as the Commissioner is that they will make use of that funding to take the funding to the learners as well. Yeah. To say it's incentivising training and skills in those areas is wrong. It's not incentivising it in a commercial sense, but I suppose it's enabling provision to be more possible in those areas.
I don't see any other questions. So thank you very much, Claire and Nick, for picking that up. And we just need to note the first of the recommendations, but the second one is to vote on approving the funding flexibilities. So I'm happy to propose that. Could I have a seconder for, thank you, Sam, for that, and all those in favour, if you could indicate, please. Thank you very much. That's carried. And we'll move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the Employment and Skills Board update, which I think is that back with you, Claire? No. Liz, sorry, Liz. Of course.
Okay, yep, you can hear me. Thank you. Yep, so Employment and Skills Board, we had the last board on the 17th of May, I believe. It was back in May. It feels like a long time ago. Yeah, the agenda largely focused around unemployment data. We had quite a long discussion around apprenticeship and technical education, and a progress update from Claire on the Good Work Charter as well, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. We did welcome 2 new members to the board. One is sat with us today, Katie, who obviously brings with us a wealth of finance and manufacturing experience across the region, and also Lee Roberts, who is the Policy and Insight Manager at Cambridge County Council, who specialises in things such as pupil forecasting, socio-demographic research, and does help work with the Combined Authority regularly around data insights for us to help inform our work. So with the unemployment data sides of things, again, we had quite a long discussion on this during the board. So Julia Nix presented the latest monthly data, which was from April at the time. And we were looking at, so this is unemployment data ranging from ages 16 to 64. Of the data from that time, the lowest rates were actually coming from East Cams at 3%, and our highest unemployment rates were coming from Peterborough at 5%. And when we were talking about this, we, I think, wanted to understand a little bit more about specific demographics within that data, and sort of breaking that data down further, so that we could look at, again, that impact and where we might need to potentially have any refocus of the work that we're doing, or a heavier focus. But during the discussion, it was noted from DWP that a large sort of proportion of the unemployment data were coming from that 16 to 24-year-old age range. And I think, Eileen, going back to what you were mentioning earlier, we did have a discussion around, you know, what are we still seeing as the impacts from COVID? What are we still seeing from impacts of mental health? And where are we working towards that to help both employers and residents alongside DWP with the work that we do? So there was an action just, I think, on the next meeting to have a further look into the breakdown of that data going forwards. We also spoke about work expectations, and, you know, particularly since COVID, how younger job seekers might have different expectations to what they may have done before in terms of flexible work arrangements, and again, discussions around how we're working with employers with that information. We also had a bit of a refresher, I think it's probably fair to say, around all of the different types of support and programmes that are offered through DWP. As we know, there's many options, and we want to make sure that everybody is aware of the different options and opportunities available. So we touched on things like access to work, we touched on things like disability confident, and how DWP employment advisors can support employers to become disability confident employers. We spoke about internships, which is something Alexa's team is very focused on, and just joining up that provision and where those joining points are and referral points are. We then moved on to, like I said earlier, the apprenticeship discussion. So Laura Geimer, who many of you know, our Strategic Careers Hub lead, brought a presentation forwards to ESB in May around apprenticeship and technical education, sort of transitions and where we are with that at the moment. Apprenticeships obviously are a strong focus at the Combined Authority. A lot of the work that we do across funding streams, across teams, both skills team and wider, does focus on apprenticeship. So skills boot camps following, you know, a job outcome into an apprenticeship, internships following into that work. And essentially last September, I believe it was, the Careers and Enterprise Company published a report which was the conditions for transition, and that was all around supporting young people onto apprenticeships and onto technical pathways. They are looking to produce that annual report again this year, and some of the discussion that took place during ESB was to help inform some of our regional analysis and regional sort of progression around the work that we've been doing in apprenticeships and technical pathways. And I think it was quite interesting as well, within the report it did sort of state the collective purpose of the work that Careers Enterprise Company does, our Careers Hub does, and our wider work. It's not about making every young person take an apprenticeship or enrol on technical education, but it is making sure that every young person is aware of what's available and has access to those routes, should that be the routes that they want to take. So we discussed things around access to relevant training options, and that's from a transport point of view, Charlotte, that you raised earlier, but also from actually the types of courses that are offered. Are they the right apprenticeship courses that are offered in the region? Are people able to have the sort of breadth of options around that? We also spoke quite a lot on employer willingness and sort of employer willingness to take on an apprentice, recruit an apprentice, progress apprentices. Quite interesting discussion around that, where some of the employers on the board said, well, actually there is employer willingness and we do have willingness, but we're also very aware that we need to have enough support in the business to support that apprentice. And so just, you know, some of those challenges around that. And other things around conversion rates. So, you know, have we got young people interested in apprenticeships and technical education in the region, but are they actually applying to those options? And if not, why not? So a lot of interesting discussion around that. And Claire then also gave an update on the Good Work Charter, which I believe is on the forward plan for next committee. So again, strong support in having the Good Work Charter, both from SMEs and larger employers. Not necessarily support for needing this to be a sort of formal accreditation process or anything like that, but very strong interest in the region around practical tools and support for employers in having sort of a Good Work Charter as a recognisable, not certification, but for those. So I think a task and finish group is currently being assembled around that for further development on the charter. They were the main discussions that we had, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Liz. Casey, I don't know whether you want to add anything at this point. You don't have to.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. It was my first visit. I think there was also a really interesting stat that the DWP brought as well that still sticks in my mind, because it seems interesting, was that the trend for City of Cambridge unemployment was the highest they'd seen in a long time, just this last set of reporting period. So I think Julia went away with some work still on understanding exactly what that was, but it just seemed, out of all the data sets and the normal trending, it seemed a bit of an anomaly, so it's quite interesting.
On that one, which has come from various different conversations I have been in this week, including one with Cambridge Ahead, who raised the same thing that had been raised by some other people, which is that I think there's a sense in which some of that employment data for our region, but not just for our region, isn't necessarily terribly accurate at the moment. And I think I've been picking that up from a variety of different places. So it is very interesting, but I don't think we should necessarily get too bogged down in trying to work out why it's the case, because it might just be inaccurate data. And I think there is some inaccuracy in some of the data that the ONS is collecting, because employers are not necessarily answering their questionnaire as well as they should be. I can't remember what it's called. There's an employment questionnaire that they do. Anyway, but that is interesting, and it's something we need to keep an eye on. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Eileen?
It's not really a question, it's a comment. Melissa mentioned access to work, and I just wonder how much that is promoted with employers and people, learners. We had experience of it because my son can't drive because he's sight impaired, and we had a real problem him getting to a job in London because the public transport just wasn't there, and so he did get a taxi every morning from our home to the station and back again, paid for by DWP. He just had to make a small contribution, which was like the equivalent of a bus fare, and that just made all the difference to him being able to take up a job on promotion, which otherwise he wouldn't have been able to follow. And for someone with a disability, that is really important. And it did take us a long time to find out about that. And so I would like to see more promotion of that facility for people who perhaps think they can't go to work because they can't drive or whatever.
Yeah, really helpful, an important point. Claire?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, and because Melissa mentioned the Good Work Charter, I think one of the key things that we want to do with this, subject to it being developed and coming back to committee and with stakeholders, is this, that from an employer perspective, how can we best support employers, both with knowledge, with skills, with training, whatever it may be, just exposure perhaps, to know about the things that are available for them and have the confidence to use them in the workplace. So actually, if you are coming into the workplace and you have a disability or a long-term health issue, your employer knows about these things proactively and has confidence in using and giving the support that's out there. So I think that's one of the key things, I think, in the Good Work Charter that we can support employers and line managers with, to know how best to support people coming into the workforce.
I think we're seeing it both through the data, which you air some caution to, but also through the evidence that we collect within the local skills improvement plan. That long-term sickness piece is definitely a challenge, and we've got to turn our attention to it, but also proactively, how do we help keep healthy people and you know, good well-being within employment. Transport, again, came up as a really important point, as Liz highlights, and I appreciate our last conversation we talked just about making sure that the training was provided to local place, but if we then don't have the connectivity to get people to places of employment, we're failing. So that was, I just wanted to build on my earlier point, but also thinking proactively. We also saw data through the meeting whereby things like alternative provision is oversubscribed. In the press locally this weekend, actually the challenge to keep teachers within the workplace is an issue, and Councillor Cole's also pointing to those early years, getting children ready to come into the educational space, which I appreciate we can't get mission creep, but we also have to have our eyes on what is going to be the next big challenge coming through for the region.
Just picking up on what Charlotte said in terms of, you know, my own personal experience. I am a teacher, been a teacher for over 20 years, and morale and recruitment and retention in terms of teachers, not just in primary but secondary and across the whole sector, is the lowest it has ever been. And, you know, you've got an awful lot of new teachers coming on board, but it's the experienced teachers that are waving goodbye. And I think across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, you know, we've got increasing numbers of population growth, particularly in Peterborough, ensuring that we've got enough of the more experienced professionals in a range of sectors is really, really key. And, you know, Peterborough and Cambridgeshire is growing. And, sorry, Peterborough and Cambridgeshire are growing. I'm saying it the right way around. Are growing, and we need to ensure that the right incentives are there to encourage people to move out to these new villages like Great Haddon and places like that, and that the connectivity is there. So I just wanted to agree with.
Thank you. I think those concerns are shared very widely. Thank you both, all of you, very much for that update. Very helpful. I think that is just for noting, and no vote is required, and we will move on to Bruna on a budget and performance report. Thank you, Bruna.
Hello, nice to see you all. So I'm bringing you your regular finance update. So this time around is slightly different from what you're used to, because we're focusing on what is the budget that we can spend and we're getting in during this current financial year, so that we have an idea of what's going on. So the budget is made up from the original budget, and that it was agreed through the MTFP process, plus for the expenditure, plus the slippage, so what we haven't spent in the previous year, that CA board also approved this in June, very recently. So in relation to income, we have in our budget £14.4 million, of which of course the majority of it is the adult education budget, so 12 million out of it. Also, we have to note that this table does not show the bootcamp wave 5, that is just shy of 3 million. That's because it was agreed with the FE earlier later than when we finished the budget round. So it will agree to go through, but it's not on the table yet. So the table will be then adjusted to show that, but it's not what was the real numbers in the budget. That's the reason why it's out of it. In relation to expenditure, the majority of our expenditure is of course revenue, and the total planned expenditure for the year is £18 million, of which 6.4 was already in the budget and 1.6 was deferred. The majority, of course, again, is going to be the AB, the Evolve budget program. And together in the same vein, we will have Multiply, that is 1.4, and the Skill Bootcamp Wave 4, so the remainder of the previous, of the contract that we are still working on, and further, just shy nearly 4, just shy of 1.4 as well. Important to note, within the slippage, we have a large variance related to the AB innovation funds, so we are carrying forward nearly £700,000, which make the total we can spend this year just shy of 1.2 million. So there is lots of room from a financial perspective to do nice and innovative things within the area of AB, and using all the information we have capture, and we spoke about it earlier during the meeting anyway. In relation to the other thing that we can see here is the health and well-being strategy that we were starting to work on last financial year, but that we didn't fully manage to develop. It will be developed throughout this year and launched and delivered during the year. That's the £500,000 is there. Different from usual, we also have a little bit of capital expenditure that is planned for this year. This is our, for someone has well-known FE call spot, and this is 2.12 million that you will need to agree how to use after that. The full work from Grant Thornton will be finished, and we focus on where we want to further develop our capability. And this is everything on the report. So please let me know if you have questions.
Thank you very much, Bruna. Are there questions on the report?
It's for the lights.
Yes,
I wasn't
indeed.
asking questions.
Not a question for yourself.
But, yeah.
I don't see any questions. So thank you very, very much for the report.
Any question, please
Yeah.
even after the meeting, please let me know.
Thank
It's not
you.
a problem.
That's great. Okay, so we will move on to the agenda plan. There have been a couple of changes to the agenda plan, partly because, well, certainly a couple of those are because there were items that would have been coming to this meeting but were thought somewhat political and therefore have been moved to the meeting on the 29th of July, post the general election. The 29th of July is during the school holidays, so if anyone's going to find that a problem, perhaps I'm just flagging that to so that people can make sure that they've planned for subs to attend or something if necessary. So it's just to make people aware of that.
It's the reserve day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the reserve day, but we need to use it because of the need to move some of the items from this agenda. Does anyone else have any other comments on the agenda plan? Again, I don't see any, so that's great. Before we finish, I want to say a fantastic thank you to Claire, who this will be her last meeting. I have really, really enjoyed working with Claire, and I know a number of us have. It's been a slightly tricky time to come in at short notice and take over a range of different things, but it has been a real pleasure working with you, so thank you for everything that you've done for the Combined Authority, and we will miss you. But at that meeting on the 29th, we will have our new substantive post holder in place. So it will be very good to welcome Angela when she gets here. At which point, I think I will close the formal business of the meeting. I do have one other thing I want to